We are joined now live by Congressman Buddy Carter, who represents Georgia's coastal 1st Congressional District. He's a Republican who is also currently running for Senate. Congressman, we always appreciate your time. Can you hear us okay?
Yes, hear you great.
All right, Congressman, we just got this update from NBC's Raf Sanchez on this ongoing military conflict against Iran. What's your assessment of how the conflict has been going so far?
Well, I applaud the president for what he's doing. He is doing something that needed to be done for 47 years. Let's face it, Iran has been spreading terror throughout the world for 47 years now, and now we're finally doing something about it. Finally, we have a president who is addressing it. Iran is the leading state sponsor of terrorism in the world, and they have blood of American citizens on their hands. Blood of American citizens from the USS Cole. What happened in Israel on October the 7th? Yes, there were 1,000 Israelites who were killed there, but there were also 46 Americans who were killed. Let's not forget that. Over the years, this regime has spread terror throughout the world and in America, chanting "Death to America, death to America." This is something that needed to be done, and I would submit to you that this president has saved millions of lives in the future by prohibiting Iran from having a nuclear weapon. He's made it clear to Iran, you're not going to have a nuclear weapon. And we thank him for that, because if they had a nuclear weapon, God forbid what might happen then.
Congressman, what is, in your view, the goal and the end game of this military conflict? At times, the Trump administration has presented it as regime change. At other times, the president has talked about preventing Iran from having the ability to procure a nuclear weapon. What should be the administration's focus and goal and end game of this conflict?
Well, the administration's focus and their end game is clear, and that is to make sure that Iran never has a nuclear bomb, to make sure that Iran quits killing their own citizens, the protesters, over 30,000 that they have killed, to make sure that Iran is no longer a state sponsor of terrorism throughout the world. Listen, I would submit to you that the world is safer now than we were before this started, and with a weakened Iran. And yes, we've had some unfortunate circumstances, and our thoughts and prayers go out to the 13 heroes who gave their life in defending our country and our freedoms. And we thank them and we praise them. But at the same time, this is something that has to be done, and I applaud the president for doing it.
Congressman, what do you say to some voters, including many Republican voters, who were appreciative of the president on the campaign trail talking about no more forever wars? And now this military conflict is underway. Some Republicans have expressed some frustration with this. What do you say to those voters?
Well, look, none of us want a forever war. And yes, the president doesn't want a forever war. We don't need those. We don't want those. However, we cannot afford to allow Iran to have a nuclear weapon. Now, look, we had Operation Midnight Hammer, and we decimated their nuclear abilities, but they kept right on enriching uranium to try to build a nuclear bomb. They did not learn their lesson. Now they've learned an important lesson, and that is you're not going to have a nuclear weapon. So we make it clear, yes, when will this end? It will end when Iran does not have the ability to make a nuclear weapon, when the missiles that they have aimed at American bases in the Middle East and in our allies in the Middle East, when we have depleted those weapons, then that's when it will end.
Congressman, I want to talk to you about a couple other topics that have been impacting folks here in Metro Atlanta, including the ongoing partial government shutdown impacting the Department of Homeland Security. Before we turn there, though, I do want to ask you one last question on the topic of this ongoing war, this military conflict against Iran. Earlier today, this is breaking news, Joe Kent, he's the director of the National Counterterrorism Center. He resigned, saying on social media that Iran, quote, posed no imminent threat to our nation, and it is clear we started this war due to pressure from Israel and its powerful American lobby. What do you say in response to those comments from Joe Kent?
I would disagree with him. I adamantly disagree. Look, an imminent threat. If you are if you're one of our troops in a base in the Middle East, and Iran has missiles aimed at those bases, you consider it an imminent threat. It was an imminent threat, and I applaud the president for addressing that imminent threat. We cannot afford to let Iran do this. and I think he was perfectly within his authority to do this, and I applaud him for doing it. We cannot afford to let Iran intimidate and be the leading sponsor of terrorism, state sponsor of terrorism in the world. They've done it for 47 years now, and it needs to end. And this president is going to make sure it ends.
Congressman, would you support putting American troops on the ground, or do you want to see this remain a primarily airstrike only campaign?
I do not want to see boots on the ground. Neither does the president. None of us want to see boots on the ground. However, the president is not going to. He's not going to show his cards. He's not going to divulge what he's going to do. He's being very strategic about this, and that's the way he should be. You don't go tell another team the plays that you're going to run. You leave all your options on the table, and that's what this president has done. But we've been very successful with the airstrikes, and we've been able to neutralize them, and this is very important.
Congressman, let's shift gears here. It's a busy week in Washington, and it has been a busy few days here in Metro Atlanta as well. We're now well into the partial government shutdown, impacting the funding for the Department of Homeland Security. Still no resolution to open funding back up for DHS. How do you think this situation should be resolved?
Well, we need to keep the main thing, and that is to get the Department of Homeland Services funded. That is the main thing. Look, here we are in a time of conflict, and John Ossoff and the Democrats are refusing to fund a Department of Homeland Security that's going to protect our country. Look at what has happened. In Old Dominion, we had a beloved soldier, a decorated hero, who was killed, Brandon Shaw, who was a University of Georgia alum, who was stationed at one point at Hunter Army Airfield in the 1st Congressional District. He was killed. We also had the situation up in Michigan where the brother of a Hezbollah officer ran his car into a synagogue. These are acts of terror. This is a time that we need the Department of Homeland Security to protect our country. And what we have John Ossoff and the Democrats who are putting illegal immigrants and terrorists ahead of the safety of the American citizens by not funding the Department of Homeland Security.
Now, at the heart of this conversation at the U.S. Capitol is a debate and a real policy split over the funding, in particular, of the immigration enforcement sub-agencies under the umbrella of the Department of Homeland Security. I'm talking about ICE and Customs and Border Protection. There are a whole host of other agencies under DHS that don't really touch immigration, things like the Coast Guard, TSA, FEMA, Secret Service, and others. Would you be open to splitting those votes, where there's maybe one vote to fund the immigration enforcement focused components of DHS and another vote to fund those other sub-agencies?
Well, let's keep in mind that for 4 years during the Biden-Harris administration, John Ossoff and the Democrats supported the open borders that let 15 million illegal immigrants into this country. We would be naive to think that there weren't some criminals involved in that and some terrorists who came across at that time. That's why we need ICE to be funded. We need them to be funded so that we can protect our country from these terrorists who came in during this policy of the open borders. We need to make sure that we put American safety first, above any illegal immigrants, above terrorists. Yet John Ossoff and the Democrats, they're doing just the opposite.
Just to be clear, though, for folks who maybe don't follow what happens under the Capitol Dome as closely as some others, over the summer, President Trump's backed Big Beautiful Bill was passed, signed into law, and that earmarked a great deal of funding for the immigration enforcement efforts under those sub-agencies of the Department of Homeland Security. So they should have enough funding to continue in their mission right now, right?
Well, they do, and that's a very astute point, and we appreciate you understanding that. We made sure that was the case. However, we need to make sure that ICE is funding. This ploy, if you will, that the Democrats are pulling now, John Ossoff and the Democrats, to try to defund ICE is nothing more than a defund the police, an extension of that. That's what they were trying to do a couple of years ago. That's what they're trying to do now. We need ICE. We need them because their focus right now is to get rid of the criminal illegal immigrants who are in our country.
Congressman, just a couple last questions for you here, and I do want to touch on ongoing debate that appears to be set to kick off in the U.S. Senate regarding the SAVE Act, and I want to ask you about that in a moment. Before we turn there, though, just one follow-up on the ongoing conversation about this partial government shutdown. Understanding the funding situation for those immigration enforcement-focused agencies, I just want to ask you one last time, to be clear, would you support splitting out the vote to fund DHS into two subvotes, one for the non-immigration enforcement focused entities and another vote for all the others? Or do you want to see this all voted on in one sweep?
There's no excuse why we shouldn't be able to fund all of it at once. However, if that does come up, we'll cross that bridge when we get to it. But at the same time, we need to make sure we understand ICE is important. Making sure that they are funded is important to make sure that we're protecting our country. Yes, we want our TSA agents to be paid. Over 100,000 Department of Homeland Security employees missed a paycheck last week. We've already had 300 people quit TSA. And we've got the number of absentees have doubled, causing these long lines that you were just showing on your program at the airports during a busy travel time. We also know that FEMA is funded under this agency. And that is something we need right now with all these storms and everything that we've been having. We need FEMA. Also, the Coast Guard, as you mentioned, they are very important to be funded as well. We've got Coast Guard troops who are in the Middle East right now who aren't getting paid. That needs to be taken care of. There's no question about that.
All right, Congressman, let's switch gears in the time we have left here. The SAVE Act is getting a lot of attention on Capitol Hill. Where do you stand on this bill? And for those who maybe are not so familiar with it, what, in your view, would its passage accomplish?
Well, it would accomplish the fact that our elections would be secure because you would have to have a photo ID in order to vote. Almost over 80% of Americans agree this is common sense legislation. But why does John Ossoff and why did the Democrats not want this? Because for 4 years they supported open borders, allowing over 15 million illegal immigrants to come into this country. Now they're trying to turn them into voters. That is not what we are supposed to be doing in America. You should have a photo ID in order to make sure that you vote. You have to have a photo ID for everything else. If you're going to cash a check, if you're going to go to a rally for John Ossoff, you have to have a photo ID. If you're going to shovel snow in New York City, you have to have a photo ID. Yet the Democrats don't want you to have a photo ID in order to vote. It's just ludicrous. It's hypocritical.
I want to read you something that the Senate Minority Leader, Chuck Schumer, put out on social media earlier today. He tweeted that Democrats will block the SAVE Act in the Senate, saying in part that the bill purges millions of Americans from voter rolls and kills online mail and voter registration. That was his criticism of this bill. What do you say in response?
I think it's ludicrous that they're saying this. It's common sense legislation. You need a photo ID in order to vote. You need to be a citizen of this country in order to vote. What do you have to do now? You only have to check a box that says, I am a U.S. citizen. Now, look, I was born at night, but it wasn't last night. I'm going to expect someone who crossed that border illegally to tell the truth about that. I need a photo ID. Americans are demanding this. 80%. When you talk about 80% of Americans, you're talking about Republicans and Democrats as well.
Congressman Buddy Carter, as always, we appreciate your time and your perspective. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Zach.